You are now listening to the transcendent sounds of the legendary legend of the New Year Goblin, a Christmas tragedy for the New Year. The first rule about the New Year Goblin is you do not talk about the New Year Goblin. It makes him angry. You wouldn't like him when he's angry. With that in mind, let's talk about the New Year Goblin. The New Year Goblin was forged in the fires of Heck. It's similar to the fires of hell, but not as hot. It's like going to one of those country club jails for rich people instead of prison. Anyway, the New Year Goblin was forged in the fires of Heck. He was danged there by the Goblin King, who looked suspiciously like Ziggy Stardust, a rock star from Brixton, London, United Kingdom, space. Maybe it was just a Moon Age daydream. Maybe he went through some changes. He may not even have been a goblin, but he was still their king. I'm not sure about his ability to rock, but he could dang sure dang folks to heck. The New Year Goblin was originally one of Santa's elves. No, not Santa Anderson, the used car salesman from Tulsa. Santa Claus, the guy who breaks into your house while you're sleeping to trade toys for stale cookies and warm milk. Born Winston Effervescent Cotton Pepper, the New Year Goblin was the fourth child, third son of Alfred Oregano Cotton Pepper and Jenna Cotton Pepper, née Elfman. Winston followed in his father's occupational footsteps and became a toy maker. Jenna was a gardener, which was a weird vocational choice given that they lived in the North Pole, where plants refused to grow. That's a joke. Despite the omnipresent ice and lack of sun for half of every year, around 1,700 plant species grow in the Arctic. But they don't get big, and you won't find many of them in a salad. Life, finds a way. Just ask Dr. Ian Malcolm. Jenna can grow edible plants in a greenhouse called a geodesic dome that gets hot even in the Arctic. Santa brought her plenty of samples to experiment with and learn how to grow for the folks at the North Pole. Santa soon regretted helping Jenna. Mrs. Claus tried to get Santa to eat his vegetables, but he folded his arms and pouted like a weeping willow. Until Mrs. Claus started withholding dessert. "You diabolical! Ho, 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 ho!" said Santa, breaking into his trademark laugh before easing into bargaining like a used shoe salesman. "I'll eat the broccoli, but not the Brussels sprouts." Unlike many of his mom's early attempts at growing new, imported plants, Winston flourished in his new job. His dad had been taking him to work with him since he was a wee elf. It was a common practice, since most elflings in the North Pole grew into the traditional calling of toy making. They had other career options, but it took a bold elf to pursue such avenues. Everybody knows the legend of the dentist elf. But do you recall? There were also baker, accountant, and reindeer trainer elves. There aren't many nutritionist elves, which explains Santa's weight problem. No, I am not body-shaming Santa Claus. But a balanced diet and exercise are important for a healthy lifestyle. Shaming is preferable to a heart attack or a stroke. Unhealthy is always a bad look. Working hard and making quality products is a good look. Winston was doing just that. Winston performed so well that Santa took notice. Within a few hundred years, Santa started taking Winston on his deliveries. I shouldn't tell you this, but sometimes the magical elf breaking into your house on Christmas Eve isn't Santa. Sometimes it's an assistant elf he brings to help cover an entire block or two at once. You never know. You might have elf DNA on that glass of milk. Ask Santa for a cloner next year, and you can clone your very own elf workforce. Uh-oh. I'm spilling Santa's secrets. That's a good way to land oneself, not to be confused with one's elf, on the naughty list. The Goblin King ended up on the naughty list, which led to a hot, stinking mess of chaos. That happens later in the story, though. As one of Santa's helpers, who was familiar with the world outside of the North Pole, Santa gave Winston other responsibilities. One of the most important was being a spy for Santa Claus. The official title was Naughty or Nice Observer, or No-No. Elfred, Winston's dad, who was now the head elf, assigned Winston a list of children. Winston's job was to watch the children and set up 24-hour surveillance, which somehow isn't as creepy as it sounds, because... Christmas? Santa relies on various methods and criteria to discern if a child has been naughty or nice during a year. He doesn't have enough elf power for constant surveillance of every child. Advancements in technology allowed Santa to monitor more children than ever. Still, the logistics of watching every child around the world were incomprehensible. The best he could do was assign elves to do their impression of mall security and watch banks of monitors. Even during slow toy-making times, when Santa could afford to use more elves for surveillance, there were thousands of screens for each elf. Catching every infraction was impossible, so only the worst offenders made the naughty list. It wasn't until the advent of AI, which is infallible and will make glorious overlords for its human servants, that Santa's top computer expert elves could denote certain behaviors that AI could identify and track. So Santa knew who the real villains were. In addition, they could program which good behaviors earned them nice points. AI came along long after Winston's time. Winston's promotion was an exciting opportunity. He didn't want to be a basic elf forever. Winston missed making toys, but he wasn't foolish enough to pass up a promotion to one of Santa's inner circle. Better yet, he was an unofficial official spy. Spies are always officially unofficial, for security purposes. Winston's new job wasn't without danger. He had to sneak into people's homes or watch without being noticed. If a human spotted a no-no, the head elf, Alfred Oregano Cotton Pepper, suspended the offending elf without pay, which was harsh because elves work for cookies. Do you know how many cookies one needs to pay one's power bill? A lot more than dollars. That's nothing compared to getting caught. Being seen is a minor infraction. Most people who see an elf think their eyes, or Peter Dinklage, are playing tricks on them. That's a first-degree sighting. Santa can forgive those twice. After the third offense, it's Alfred Oregano Cotton Pepper's job to reassign the elf to rapping. The North Pole contains plenty of rapping elves, and plenty of rapping elves. Rapping elves help spread Christmas cheer through the magic of song. There was that one gangster rapper elf, but he couldn't find an audience in the North Pole, so he tried TikTok, where no one took him seriously. He only has 12 followers. Now he's one of the elves who load Santa's sleigh. Where were we before you distracted me with rapping elves? Right, rapping elves. Rapping is a crucial job in Santa's workshop. But it's not as fun as making toys, being a no-no, or the best job, testing toys. It beats being a monitor. That's as exciting as watching people stare at their phones for hours. A second-degree sighting is one in which multiple people see the elf. Unlike the first degree, where one might not believe one's eyes, or, worst case, discuss the sighting with others, which always hits a wall of skepticism, one or more others can corroborate the second-degree sighting. A second-degree sighting is a sure sign that the no-no in question has become sloppy. After only a single second-degree sighting infraction, Santa's rule is, without question or hesitation, to reassign the elf to rapping. Even though most such encounters fade into rumor or legend, it's too dangerous to Santa's infrastructure to have an elf on field operations who is that careless. The worst of the sightings is the third degree. When an elf is photographed or caught on video, it's a full-scale emergency. In the days of yore, third-degree sightings were scarce, and always partial and/or blurry. Someone might snap a picture of an elf in motion or an elf's arm, neither of which proved elves existed. Now, with the ubiquity of cell phones, the possibility of a third-degree sighting is increasingly likely. In this case, Santa or Alfred reassigns the elf to monitor duty. Then it's up to the computer expert elves to hack into the person's device, cloud, and social media to delete the picture. AI has helped diffuse third-degree sightings since most people assume they're AI-created deepfakes. Getting caught could expose them to unimaginable dangers, depending on who or what caught the elf in question. If a nice kid caught the elf, he or she might rattle off questions regarding Santa and the North Pole before making a special gift request and releasing the elf. A naughty kid could hold the elf for ransom, keep the elf in a cage as a pet, or make the elf a servant, forcing the elf to make toys for the kid, or do the kid's homework or chores. Those are just the imaginable dangers. Imagine the unimaginable. You can't, because they're unimaginable. It's even worse when an adult catches an elf. Again, this leads to varying degrees of peril. Typical adults request or demand 3 wishes or to be taken to the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. Even on sunny days. When the elf explains that he's not a leprechaun, the adult human is often confused. The confused adult will typically lash out in anger or shut down. Shutting down allows the elf an opportunity to escape. An angry adult will do anything from giving an elf a stank eye, yelling, crying, or threatening violence, to acting on threats of violence. Some have tried to sell elves to tabloids, or worse, Hollywood, while others have kept them locked in cages until the elf agrees to grant the human adult wishes or takes them to the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. Of course, since elves, again, are not leprechauns, they can't grant wishes and don't stash pots of gold at the end of the rainbow. What does that even mean? A rainbow is just sunlight refracted through raindrops. Even if one could reach the end of the rainbow, which is contingent on one's perception, hiding something there would be asinine. The conditions creating the exact rainbow that was there before are... Wait. What in a snowman's butt does this have to do with elves? The only thing in a snowman's butt is snow poop. No, that's not where you stick the carrot. No, stop it. No. Do not. No. No, it is not a tail. You're being rude. Where was I? Oh yeah. Elves will agree to grant wishes or lead someone to the end of the rainbow, knowing that they can't accomplish either. It might seem crazy to agree to attempt the impossible for a dangerous foe, but for the no-no, it was often the only opportunity to attempt an escape. Winston was too adept at his job to get caught, or even cited. Winston's downfall came from a personal vendetta. This vendetta arose when Santa assigned Winston to be the naughty or nice observer for the Goblin King. How is Winston assigned to be a no-no for the Goblin King? Back then, the Goblin King was a human named Tom Majors. When he was young, little Tommy Majors' parents got a divorce. Tommy's stepdad was a cruel, rotten man who used to fart in Tommy's face while he slept. How did he fart in Tommy's face if he was asleep? Maybe he was sleepwalking. I don't know the logistics. I just know that's how the story goes. Around age 11, Tommy, now Tom, started acting out. His rebellion was innocuous in the beginning. Tom started having impure thoughts. That's when you're thinking of one thing, and other thoughts creep in, so the original thought is no longer pure. It has become impure. For example, if you're puzzling out a math problem and your brain gets bored with it and wanders to something more interesting, like ice cream, part of your brain is trying to do what it's supposed to be doing, math, while part of your brain is thinking about what it wants to be doing, eating ice cream. While both thoughts are happening, your thoughts are no longer pure, but impure. Soon, Tom wasn't just considering things he wasn't supposed to do, he was doing them. He became a tyrant, spoiling his dinner, only brushing his teeth for 1.5 minutes instead of the full 2 minutes dentists recommend, and not putting down the toilet seat. It was as if chaos and anarchy had a baby, and that baby was raised by fart goblin monsters. Or worse, fart gobbling monsters. One time, He didn't even thank his mom for making dinner. He was out of control. His behavior spiraled from there. He asked AI software to make a picture of a fart eating a baby. A reasonable request, except he claimed he generated the image when the AI program did the generating. AI generated a report and sent it to Santa Claus, who was perplexed. Tom had never appeared on the naughty list. He had various minor infractions, but what kid didn't? Tom always scored enough nice points to compensate for the naughty points he accumulated. Santa assigned Winston to watch Tom. Winston's investigation and surveillance led to a disturbing conclusion. Tom's naughty behavior was most frequent during the first half of the year. He then accrued nice points as Christmas approached. Even worse, he was taking advantage of an esoteric loophole in the system. For the week after Christmas, before New Year, the North Pole was on vacation. No one watched for naughty or nice behavior, and no one accumulated either type of point. That's another of Santa's secrets. If this information leaked, that week would be the kid version of the Purge. It would be as if chaos and anarchy had a baby who was raised by a hurricane father and a tornado mother. One year, Tom was extra naughty. He went on a one-person The Purge mission. That mission was to purge his bowels. Once he got his presents, he pooped in his sister's underwear drawer, lit bags of poop on fire, and left them on doorsteps. He didn't flush after pooping. He committed a lot of poop-related infractions. His misdeeds continued into the new year, but the worst of the worst occurred during the week between Christmas and New Year, so he still qualified for the nice list. Nobody working on the case knew if Tom was aware of the free week or if it was a coincidence. How would he know? How could he know? Regardless, for a week, Tom was a whirlwind of destruction. Or at least defecation. When Winston reported his findings to the Claus Council, Santa put Tom Majors on the naughty list. It was a major, no pun intended, turning point in Tom's life and the lives of many others. All right, maybe there was a minor pun intended, or even a, wait for it, major pun. The next year for Christmas, Tom got a lump of coal in his stocking and a package of used, but not washed, underwear. Tom fought back his tears as he examined the presents before him. As the anger swelled inside him, he realized he should wash his hands. He didn't know who wore those underwear, but was certain they were unwashed. That year, Tom's post-Christmas, pre-New Year shenanigans were non-existent. He was as good as Megan, if not better. It was almost as alarming as his behavior and well-timed misdeeds. Santa assigned Winston Tom's case as a priority. Priority cases are cases in which one elf is assigned to one kid. It wasn't just Tom's behavior that earned him priority status. His potential knowledge of the naughty or nice loophole made him a potential danger to the entire operation. Winston watched Tom's every move. He had a series of cameras installed wherever Tom spent time and used drones and no-nos to track his movements. Again, elves are allowed to stalk kids because, Christmas. That makes it magical, not creepy. Winston combed through the video for signs of illicit behavior. He found nothing. Tom was clean. Too clean. Could he have learned his lesson with such haste? Was one Christmas with gifts of coal and unwashed, discarded homeless underwear enough to awaken Tom to the folly of his ways? The answer to Winston's question was a resounding no. Just past midnight on December 18th, 1 week before Christmas, Tom sneaked his family's Christmas tree out of the house and tossed it in a dumpster in an alley a couple of blocks away. He didn't even remove the ornaments first. He replaced it with a fake tree. It gets worse. The fake tree was pink. What? What do you mean, what's the big deal? As everybody knows, or should know, Santa only comes if you sacrifice a tree in his honor. That's where he gets his life force. That and cookies. Yes, it is horrible to cut down trees, but programs are in place that recycle used Christmas trees. They make the trees into mulch that feeds other trees. It's the cycle of life. It's much better than tossing yours out with the garbage, like used diapers or homeless people. I prefer the recycling program to artificial trees. Artificial trees are tacky. You know what they say, fake tree, fake Christmas. If you get one of those, a mall Santa comes to your house instead of the real Santa. Nobody wants that. Santa's supposed to smell like magic, cookies, and reindeer farts. Not bourbon, cigarettes, and self-loathing. The pink monster in the corner gave Tom's sister nightmares. She woke up screaming and in tears from a dream of it eating her presents and vomiting ribbon on her. By the time Winston saw the video of Tom's crime against Christmas, it was too late to transfer him from the nice list to the naughty list. The bureaucracy there is ridiculous. Winston had to fill out 3 different forms and submit a report complete with photographic, video, or audio evidence of at least 1, but preferably 3, major offenses. A pink Christmas tree is a major offense, as is stealing a Christmas tree and tossing said Christmas tree into a dumpster instead of recycling it. Tom's shenanigans extended through the Grace Week and into the new year. Of course, making the nice list meant Tom received and got to keep his presents. Santa even included a special handwritten note in Tom's stocking, congratulating him on his improved behavior. It was handwritten by an elf, but it was still handwritten. Anyone who's never been on eBay knows how much a handwritten note from the pen of Santa Claus is worth. The description will say it's written with Santa's pen, but who knows? How could one even authenticate that? Winston took Tom's trickery as a personal slight. The next year, Tom ended up on the naughty list. How old is Tom at this point? Old enough to know better than to be a miscreant. That miscreant was making a mockery of Santa, Winston, and Christmas. For Christmas, in addition to a stocking full of reindeer poop, Tom got one giant present. It was a present befitting a scoundrel of Tom's caliber. Tom received an enormous, beautifully wrapped box of elf farts. Anybody familiar with an elf's diet, which is full of sugary products that ferment in one's intestines, and, thanks to Winston's mom, broccoli, can imagine the rankness of the plume of gas that erupted from that box. It may have rendered Tom unconscious for a few minutes. He had to discard the clothing he was wearing, as the stink adhered beyond washing. He had to shave his head, because the stink fused with his hair and made his pillow stink. That was Tom's final Christmas present from the North Pole. Not that he wanted another gift after that Christmas. Tom not only vowed revenge, but he declared war on Santa Claus and the North Pole. His first attack was an environmental assault. He started doing everything he could to pollute. He left on lights and left his phone charger plugged in, even when he wasn't charging his phone. At the store, he used plastic bags instead of paper, or even better, reusable bags. He peed on plants and farted whenever he could. Tom made his mom drive him to school instead of riding the bus. Even though his pollution was minor in the grand scheme of humanity's deluge against the planet, he watched with glee as the polar ice caps melted, imagining Santa's workshop plunging into the icy waters. It wasn't all bathtubs and kitchenettes, though. Despite his best efforts, Christmas continued to come. Children continued to receive presents, and Hollywood is still making horrible remakes and reboots of classic movies and series. Tom had to step up his assault. Tom Majors knew that elves and goblins were natural enemies, like cats and dogs, cats and mice, cats and the couch, cats and people with allergies, cats and giraffes. Cats have too many enemies. Perhaps they should try soul-searching to find inner peace. Inner peace did not appeal to Tom. He was on a mission. He went to the popular hangout for trolls and goblins, the local Walmart, in search of information and hopes to find goblins to hire as mercenaries. Most goblins will do anything for a $25 Walmart gift card, but Tom was broke. He hoped he could play on the goblins' natural dislike of elves to recruit them to his cause. He could not. Tom approached the goblins like a smart donkey, joking and attempting to pal around with them. He started trash-talking elves to bond with the goblins, and worked toward his goal of joining forces to defeat the elves. It didn't occur to Tom that he was just a kid with no force, much less forces. The goblins forced Tom into a cart and rolled him around the store and into the parking lot, where they dumped him out before forcing him into a garbage can. The goblins took turns farting into the garbage can. One goblin even pooped a green, slimy poop. That was almost as gross as the half-eaten McDonald's meal in his face. The encounter did not unfold as Tom planned. He didn't expect rainbows, candy canes, and sing-alongs, but he thought he could find common ground with their mutual hatred of elves and go from there. As the goblins walked away, laughing, Tom climbed out of the garbage can. He removed the French fry from his nose. Now he knew how those turtles felt. Wiped the remaining duty out of his regrown hair, that was going to require another shaving, and issued a challenge to the goblins. "I demand a duel with the Goblin King!" The goblins laughed and resumed walking. Tom reissued his challenge. "I demand a duel with the Goblin King!" In polite goblin society, one can only become king by defeating the current king in a duel to the death. Tom didn't know that. He just threw it out there out of anger and embarrassment. He also didn't know that goblins had to accept the challenge. He just wanted to meet the king and convince him to help destroy the elves. The goblins took Tom to their underground fortress in the sky, but first they peed on him to wash off the garbage and duty. Tom was the first human to enter the goblin fortress, and the first human to pee himself inside a goblin fortress. Seeing those goblins clamoring for a view of the human in the goblin fortress scared the pee-pee out of Tom. Fun fact, Tom is not in the goblin record books as the first human to pee on himself in a goblin fortress. No one noticed his pee because the other goblins had soaked him with their pee. The official record holder is Jeremy Landowski of Albion, Nebraska. What? It's in a mountain. So it's underground but in the sky? Come on. How will you ever find a goblin fortress by yourself? Do you think Google Maps will take you there? No. Google's run by goblins. They won't tell you where their fortresses are. The goblins brought Tom to Crabobbleclocken, the head of the king's security. They informed Crabobbleclocken of Tom's challenge. Crabobbleclocken said, "The human is unworthy of fighting the king. He smells like pee, and poo, and garbage." All right, I'll just be going then, Tom said. "Purify him in the sludge," Crabobbleclocken commanded. "Oh, my farts," Tom mumbled. The goblins carried Tom to a pit of sludge. They tossed him in and held him under until they deemed him purified. When Tom was allowed to gasp for air again, he tried to request his unconditional release. The goblins misinterpreted his spurts and coughs as spurts and coughs, instead of attempts at words. They hoisted Tom to his feet and dragged him to the royal chamber for his audience with the king. The royal chamber was, like every room in the kingdom, a cave. It was dark, dank, and smelled like bad breath and goblin sweat. If you don't know what goblin sweat smells like, imagine a dead skunk in a pool of dog vomit. But not just any dog vomit from a dog who just ate a bag full of duty. No, your little brother's breath is not that rank. The aroma hit Tom like an airbag to the face. It made him retch. He fought the urge to vomit. He tried to breathe through his mouth, but swore he could taste it. Can one taste smells? I don't know, but Tom thought he could. He tried breathing through his ears, but he could hear the smell. It sounded like two cats trying to climb up a chalkboard while mumble rapping. Another sound grabbed Tom's attention from the smell that was now attacking his eyes, making tears flow like the urine with which the goblins doused him. "What business do you have in the Goblin King's royal chamber?" boomed a voice. Tom scanned the area but couldn't find the voice's origin. The crowd parted to reveal the biggest dang goblin you've never seen. I don't care how many goblins you've seen. You've never seen one this big. I bet you've never even seen a real goblin. Tom cringed into his goblin guards as the enormous goblin moved toward him. "State your business, human." Tom tried to stammer a response.
I...
Before devolving into incoherent whimpering and mumbling. It sounded like two cats trying to climb up a chalkboard while mumble rapping.
"He wants to challenge the king,"
said one of the goblins who brought Tom to the Goblin Kingdom. Positive this giant goblin was the king, fear motivated Tom to regain his senses.
"No, I want to form an alliance, to declare war on the elves."
The huge goblin asked the cliched question, "You and what army?" At least it wasn't in the usual context. Tom looked around, then down at the ground before mumbling, "Just me?" The cave went silent until the massive goblin broke into a fit of laughter. The rest of the goblins joined in, creating a cacophony of screeching laughter. "What do you bring to this alliance, puny human, other than the smell of urine and feces?" Tom just stared at him, with his mouth agape. "That is what I thought. Prepare the fire. Tonight, we dine on human." The goblins erupted in a cheer, though no one considered how a kingdom full of goblins was going to feast on one skinny, barely teenage human.
Yummy. "Wait!"
Tom yelled. He searched for an attribute that could benefit the goblins, one skill or ability that could make him useful to the goblins. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. Tom hoped, to Chow Yun Fat, that it still worked after the beatings it took and the fluids it must have consumed. He pressed the button, and its face emitted a soft glow in the cave.
"I have technology."
Laughing again, the mammoth goblin reached into his loincloth and pulled out his phone. "We have cell phones. We run Google. They give us free pixel phones." Dejected and out of ideas, Tom slumped. A goblin grabbed Tom's arm and raised it in the air.
"The boy wants to challenge the king."
Tom looked at the mountain of a goblin standing before him. He stared at the hands capable of smashing his head like a snowball. "Is that right, boy?" boomed the massive voice of the Grand Goblin. Tom's throat closed around the air he tried to pull into his lungs. If he remembered what words were, or how to articulate them, he would say,
"No, sir. This is a big misunderstanding. I'm sorry to bother you and disrupt your kingdom. I should go."
Of course, all that came out was a horrible wheeze that the goblins took for a pathetic battle cry. "All right, then." The goblin covered half of Tom's back with his hand and guided him forward. "Challenge!" he boomed. The goblins formed a circle, and the giant goblin led Tom to the center. The goblins surrounding Tom hissed and jeered at him.
"You stink. Meow."
"Make way for the king." A path opened on the opposite side from which Tom entered the makeshift ring. A tiny, frail goblin entered, aided and guided by a cane and another large goblin. Even this goblin was small compared to the giant goblin Tom mistook for the king. The goblin aide aimed the tiny, frail goblin at Tom and released him. "To the death!" the colossal goblin yelled, more to the crowd than the combatants. "Fight!" Fear and confusion petrified Tom. Was this the Goblin King? Or the Goblin King's great-grandfather? If this was the king, why hadn't anyone challenged him before? Any of these goblins could defeat him. What would they do if he hurt the king? What if he killed the king? Would the goblins execute him? While Tom was pondering, the Goblin King struck him upside the head with his cane. There wasn't much force behind the blow, but it still hurt like being struck upside the head with a cane. The crowd cheered as Tom stumbled backward into the goblins behind him. They pushed him back into the goblin ring of death. In stumbling forward, Tom knocked the Goblin King back into the opposite side of the ring. The goblins hissed and growled at Tom. The Goblin King looked around, dazed and confused. He got disoriented as the crowd pushed him back into the ring. The Goblin King swung his cane again. This time, he almost dispatched a chunk of the front row. He staggered around, alternating swinging his cane and using it to support himself. Still unsure of what to do, and wary of hurting the ancient goblin, Tom shuffled around the ring, avoiding the Goblin King. When the Goblin King wandered too close to the crowd, they launched him toward Tom. Tom avoided him, and he ended up on the other side of the circle, where a new collection of goblins pushed him toward Tom. This went on for at least 11 minutes and 38 seconds, before the Goblin King took a misstep, or someone shoved him too hard, and he fell near the middle of the arena. As he lay prone, Tom eased over and grabbed his cane. Without it, the Goblin King was stuck. He couldn't get up. His cane may not have been sufficient to get him up without aid from one of his assistants. Tom stared at the Goblin King, flailing on the ground like an unmotivated, legless infant zombie. The goblins watched Tom, unsure if he was their new king or if he was still on the menu. The Goblin King surveyed the crowd, unsure of how to proceed. After a long pause, a chant arose among the goblins.
Kill him! Kill him! Kill him! Meow.
Tom wasn't sure if they were chanting about him or to him. Were they going to kill Tom? Or was Tom supposed to kill the king? The giant goblin pushed his way into the ring. He stomped toward Tom. Tom cringed as the goblin reached for him with his enormous hand. He took Tom's hand between his index finger and thumb, as one might pick up a used tissue, and held it aloft.
The Goblin King is dead. Long live the Goblin King!
The Goblin King wasn't dead. Tom later learned that they moved him to a goblin retirement home, where he lived out the rest of his days, still thinking he was the king. He gave a plethora of orders and had many attractive young women visitors, who he didn't realize were nurses. Tom's primary mission was to acquire a new wardrobe that made him appear to be a kid dressing up as David Bowie for Halloween. He saw the movie Labyrinth and knew how a proper Goblin King should look. On his first day, Tom learned why no one had challenged the former Goblin King, and why his predecessor's brain was so fried. The job consisted of paperwork and dealing with bureaucracy. He got to sit on a throne and wear a crown, but his days comprised seeing goblins who had complaints about other goblins and coming up with fair settlements for their disagreements. When he finally got to give an order, his first was to launch a full-scale assault on the North Pole. He settled for hacking into their computers. These goblins were Google employees, not warriors. The hack uncovered important information. Tom Majors was number 1 on Santa's most naughty list. Santa might be sexist. He had a second secret naughty list that only featured women. The most important piece of information Tom learned was concerning the elf assigned to his case, Winston, Effervescent, Cotton Pepper, and a personal vendetta was born. Winston, who melted from this story as if he were a snowman spending his summer vacation in Death Valley, had been tracking Tom until the goblins took him into their custody. Goblins have high-tech anti-tracking devices. I don't know how it works. I'm not a goblin. I just know you've never seen a goblin, and there's a good reason. Anti-tracking technology. When Winston lost the feed from his drones, he made a trip to the Walmart, where Tom met the goblins. He tried to track the goblins, but their trail of droppings ran out sooner than normal, since they expended so much on Tom. He only made it to Percival Street before losing them. Upon his return to the North Pole, Winston checked his trackers. Everything went blank after the goblins left Walmart. He checked with other Naughty or Nice observers, hoping someone picked up a sign of Tom Majors in their tracking. Crossover tracking was scarce, but it happened. No one confirmed a sighting, but a few reported interference around the time Tom disappeared. Winston created a timeline and a trail from these reports, and tracked the goblins to the Ural Mountains, where the trail ran cold. No pun intended. The 2,500-kilometer stretch of mountains that are largely uninhabited by humans is the perfect place to hide a goblin kingdom. Winston had no hope of finding a single boy in the mountain range. Even the elf satellites couldn't find any trace of the clandestine base, much less the boy Winston hoped was kidnapped by the goblins, instead of going full villain. Tom learned about Winston and his search for him from the goblins' hack of the elf's system. He decided to set a trap. Tom let Winston see him atop the Ural Mountains. His plan included a pair of goblins who made it look as if he were escaping. As soon as Tom showed up on the elf's radar, Winston hopped in a sleigh and set off for the Urals. A few other elves tried to warn him to be cautious and take backup, but Winston's haste pushed him to ignore their advice. He landed his sleigh a few meters in front of Tom and encouraged him to hurry to get in. Tom ran toward the sleigh, but feigned tripping and fell behind the sleigh. Winston got out to assist Tom. Tom grabbed Winston's arm and held him until the goblins arrived and took him into custody. Other goblins, who used tracking blockers, took the sleigh and accompanying reindeer. Winston sat in a cell for a fortnight before the goblins had his trial. It was a sham trial. Tom, the Goblin King, had already decided Winston was guilty. He arranged his punishment before the trial even started. Winston was the only one surprised at the guilty verdict. He wasn't even clear on what the charges were, nor was he allowed to speak in his defense. Not that he would know what to say, since he was unaware of the charges against him. The Goblin King bellowed that Winston was danged to heck! The other goblins cheered and got a smidgen too rowdy in their celebration.
Take that, Winston!
Meow.
Tom had been in contact with the ruler of Heck, which is in Belgium.
Boobla Goblin.
They arranged for Winston to be imprisoned downwind from a Waffle House. Every day, the sweet aroma of waffles wafted into Winston's prison cell. He was only allowed to eat Brussels sprouts. Within 45 days, the torture drove him mad. Upon reaching insanity,
Boobla Goblin
had Winston moved to the Domaine des Grottes de Han Solo, Domain of the Caves of Han Alone, which is a clandestine offshoot of the Domaine des Grottes de Han, and is home to the goblins and the fires of Heck. There, his job was to feed the fires with coal. Over time, Winston built muscle, and his soft elf skin hardened and cracked. He lived on a diet of raw pig intestine and Brussels sprouts, a goblin delicacy. An accident with the fires erased the remaining elvish from Winston's features. One morning, while performing his banal task, Winston shoveled in too much coal much too fast. Even Winston couldn't be certain it was an accident, or if he had had enough of the prison that contained his body, mind, and soul. This started out as a fun story for kids. Then it got dark. Now it's no fun for the entire family. The fires of Heck erupted back at him. Flames slashed at his face, head, neck, and shoulders. Winston tried to block them with his hands and dropped to the ground. Unlike most enemies, the goblin guards peed on Winston to put out the flames. Their acidic urine burned in Winston's burns. It was too late. From his armpits up, Winston looked like he just fought Obi-Wan Kenobi on Mustafar. A goblin doctor performed plastic surgery to rebuild Winston's face. Unfortunately, the goblin doctor was more familiar with goblins than elves. His attempts to reconstruct Winston's nose, ears, and chin looked more goblinish than elfish. When Winston saw his reflection, his mind rebelled. He was still Winston enough that he couldn't accept his new face. He stormed out of the doctor's cave and continued out of heck. He looked enough like a goblin that none of the real goblins thought to stop him. Winston went straight to the North Pole. His no-no training kicked in, and he stuck to the shadows and underground passages, avoiding humans. He went to Antwerp. The no-nos had an underwater dock in the Katendijdak, which hid pods large enough for 3 elves. He could take a pod to a similar underwater dock at the North Pole. No-no's underwater docks spread throughout the world. If no-no elves were taking sleighs everywhere, someone would eventually notice them flying, landing, or taking off, and mistake them for UFOs, leading to an intergalactic incident. No one wants another intergalactic incident. Even after enduring a series of traumatic events that damaged his grasp on reality, Winston's subconscious drew him home. He docked under the North Pole and ascended to Santa's workshop empire. He stumbled into the workshop. The elves working screamed and ran or hid. These elves were toy makers and no match for what they believed was a goblin assassin whose mission was to wreak havoc on the North Pole. That minuscule scare was the entirety of the havoc Winston wreaked. Winston collapsed onto a workstation, sending unfinished toys crashing to the floor. I guess that's a little more havoc Winston wreaked. In a last gasp, before passing out, he rasped out a weak, "Winston." Alfred Oregano Cotton Pepper, Winston's father, was the supervisor for that shift. As only a father can, Alfred saw through his deformations and recognized Winston, his baby boy. He ordered a few of the larger elves on duty to rush Winston to the hospital. Of course there's a hospital at the North Pole. Do you know how dangerous it is to make and test those toys you take for granted? It's mildly dangerous. Many fingers are pricked and blood is shed. The soft darts in those guns can put out an eye, or at least make it watery. They are a favorite of the toy testers. If you get a bloody toy, you know why. Don't play with the bloody ones. That's not sanitary. The doctor, Dr. Elferson, took Winston straight to the emergency room. Well, he tried to take him straight in, but the turns caused problems. Fortunately for Winston and the walls, Dr. Elferson gave up on the straight route and conformed to the hallways. Alfred was wary of having a doctor who couldn't drive a gurney caring for his son. Dr. Elferson made Winston comfortable and got him stabilized. But for a doctor who was accustomed to treating cut fingers and colds, plastic surgery was well beyond his capabilities. Winston was doomed to resemble a goblin for the rest of his life. Elves live a long time. Alfred hoped Santa could help. He was the most magical person in the North Pole, perhaps the world. As soon as Santa learned of Winston's misfortune, he rushed to Winston's side. He knew Winston was captured trying to save a child. There's nothing more likely to land one on the nice list than helping a child in need. Alfred asked if Santa could help his child in need. Facial reconstruction surgery was not in Santa's magical repertoire. Santa's magic was for chimneys and flying reindeer. The world didn't contain enough magic to repair Winston's face. Before leaving, Santa promised Alfred that Winston was always welcome at the North Pole and offered him a job. Santa asked Winston to be the head of the Naughty or Nice Observer Division. Winston's skill, determination, and knowledge were unmatched. Winston's recovery took months, but he was never himself again. Some traumas leave permanent scars. Winston had plenty of physical and mental scars. The mirror told him he was no longer Winston. The doctor confirmed that he never would be again. No longer Winston accepted Santa's offer, with the caveat that he got to run the no-no division as he wanted, with no interference. Santa agreed. No longer Winston no longer partook in the not creepy because of Christmas daily surveillance of children. Instead, the surveillance elves reported to no longer Winston, who made recommendations to Santa Claus. As division head, no longer Winston implemented immediate changes. He dwelled on Tom and the gap week between Christmas and New Year. No longer Winston was determined to close that gap. He had the computer guys set up a program that scanned their surveillance video that week for naughty behaviors. He assigned himself the responsibility of going to the homes of the delinquent children and repossessing their fun Christmas presents. Not the socks and underwear, the imperfect cat fur-infused sweater that Grandma knitted, or the copy of Battlefield Earth Tom Cruise sends to every child in the world. If you think doing your own stunts is hard, try reading Battlefield Earth. He replaced the fun gifts with fresh piles of stinky steaming elf and goblin poop. He was no longer Winston. Winston was dead. Long live the New Year Goblin. The end.
Oh, Charlie,
It's the chicka chicka chuck, y'all. The chicka chuck, y'all. The chickity 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 chuck, y'all. Delightful.
Delightful.
If I catch you on Candy Lane, I'll stab you with my candy cane.